Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of A Voluntary Review. We have a very, very special guest today. Professor Per Bylund is joining us. Now, to introduce him, I can't do much better than quoting something from this letter I got a few weeks ago from the Mises Institute. And it says, Professor Bylund is among our best and brightest young Austrian economists. He specializes in business and how firms actually produce goods. So his popular writing for outlets like The Entrepreneur magazine reflects a real-world orientation. Per is a well-known Austrian guru on financial Twitter. Many of his threads are master classes in Austrian theory and principles. And in fact, it also says, I think this was the reason they sent the letter, we've asked Dr. Bylund to produce nothing less than a simplified Austrian school version of Henry Hazlitt's great Economics in One Lesson. Now that sounds like a really tall order. I've read Economics in One Lesson, and it's really good. So can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure, absolutely. This is really, I mean, it is intended to be a sort of a short, not version, but a short book that you should be able to just put under anybody's nose, and they should be able to read it and understand what Austrian economics is about. So many people, well, at least who are Austrians, have probably had others ask them questions like, what the heck is this Austrian economics you're talking about? And what do you mean when you talk about economics in general? And the point is to have this sort of really short, easily accessible, easy to understand type of book that you can just, it should be cheap enough and easy enough to read that you can just hand it out to whomever you like. So that is the point, which of course is, I mean, Henry Hazlitt would probably be the gold standard, right? For explaining things in a very simple, easily digestible way. And what he does in the Economics in One Lesson is pretty much the same as what Frederick Bastiat does in his classic text as well. So I'm trying to do something like that. I can't promise that I get to their level, but I will do my best. And it's supposed to be about half the length of Economics in One Lesson.
Okay, definitely more approachable, it sounds like.
Exactly. And I'm also going to, I mean, it's going to be shorter. And also I'm going to cover a whole lot more ground than Henry Hazlitt does. So it is a challenge.
That does sound challenging. So then yours is not focusing just on, well, it's more focused on the Austrian side or theories of economics instead of just broadly economics. And that also kind of covers very basic principles of freedom and liberty and property as well, right?
Exactly. So in Hazlitt's book, I mean, he's basically talking about opportunity cost and the trade-off and how economists think about the world in terms of the seen and the unseen, right? And that's pretty much the whole book is trying to get the reader to understand this perspective, which is a very powerful way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, what I'm supposed to do in this book, what I'm trying to do in the book, is really to provide them with this basic economic understanding, but go beyond just the trade-off, and instead cover, in a sense, the 150 years of reasoning and theorizing in the Austrian school. So there's going to be a little bit about business cycles. There's going to be a little bit about institutions like property rights. There's going to be something about economic calculation and socialism. And there's going to be a few things about capital structure. And there's going to be something about entrepreneurship, and also about what economics does and what economics does not do.
In about half the length of Economics in One Lesson. Wow.
Yeah, I have 30,000 words. So I better choose them wisely.
Well, I'm anxious to read it. I think that's going to be fun.
Yeah, me too. I just have to write it first.
Well, changing gears a little bit to the work that you're doing now, if I understand correctly, you teach not just about economics generally, but specifically about entrepreneurship. Is that right?
That's correct. So I'm a professor in the School of Entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State. And I mean, it would not be correct to say that it is economics, since that's a separate department. So I'm not actually allowed to teach economics for that reason. But of course, you can't really talk about entrepreneurship without the economy. So I talk about the role of entrepreneurship or the function of entrepreneurship in the market process. And I also teach a course on Austrian economics, because that is sort of outside of the scope of a standard economics department.
I see. So then, are you teaching people about entrepreneurship or how to be an entrepreneur?
Well, in my personal case, I teach them about entrepreneurship, what that is and what it does. So how it contributes to economic growth, how to think like an entrepreneur, how to think about their role in the economy and things like that. Of course, if you're taking a degree in entrepreneurship, you're taking a whole lot of courses that help you produce a business plan, how to start a business, pretty hands-on stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm on the theory side, so I'm providing sort of the framework, the how to think aspect of it. So in a sense, the Austrian point of view.
Okay, very interesting. And the Austrian view of entrepreneurs, as I understand it, they're kind of the generating force behind new ideas in the economy, pushing things forward.
Exactly. So I mean, Mises even put it as the driving force of the market economy, right? So any changes that happen in the economy, any innovations, all the disruptive power of new ideas and new businesses, that's all the entrepreneur. So of course, it's a very important part of the market and part of understanding the economy. So in a sense, you can explain pretty much anything using entrepreneurship, but you probably shouldn't push it too far, right? Something that explains everything doesn't really explain a whole lot. But in the market economy, I mean, all the change that we see, the value creation aspect of the market, that is the entrepreneur.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like the kind of thing that is an interesting way of looking at different things, a different point of view that people don't usually think of.
Yeah, exactly. So it is about thinking in terms of value, which it sounds a little odd to say that, oh, it's this new perspective, thinking about the economy in terms of value. I mean, didn't everybody think about it in terms of profit and salary and stuff like that? But I mean, the real question is, how do you create more value, right? Because the resources are there. There aren't really more natural resources around, right? So we have the same as we had before. The question is, where does growth come from? How come we have so much higher standard of living today and probably a couple of years from now too than we already have? How do we generate more? And where did it come from? I mean, those questions, I would say, require entrepreneurship as a big part of the explanation.
It's very interesting. A useful way of thinking, or way to address people who say that in order to make more money, you have to be taking it away from someone else.
Exactly. So it sort of flips that view of the world onto its head, right? Because value is actually created. Mm-hmm. And you realize when you think about the economy in entrepreneurial terms, well, the market economy, I should say, when you think about it in entrepreneurial terms, it really is about creating value for others and thereby getting a cut for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So the best way to serve yourself is to serve others.
Yes. And that was been something that I've been thinking about for a while. And one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, being a professor of economics or entrepreneurship, but a doctor of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so, I am an economist. I mean, so it is confusing.
So I'm sure I'm not the first person to have thought of this, but I was reading Mises and Milton Friedman and a bunch of economists, and I was thinking of the theories of economic action always being trading value for value. And Mises, all human action is essentially economic action. And I thought, okay, what about what we do at voluntarism in action with charity? Because charity, people just think of giving, and it seems one-sided. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, there must be a reason that people are giving. And it occurred to me, Rothbard called them, I think, psychic gains. where psychologically you feel good about having given someone something. So it sounds weird, but from a strictly economic perspective, I thought, so is it logical then to say that the person who's giving is buying that satisfaction from the person they're helping? Or am I not thinking about that correctly?
No, I think you are thinking about it correctly. So I mean, there are two things to say about this, really. In any action, what we're trying to do is just become better off in some personal sense, right? So however we want to define it for ourselves, the reason we act is because we think that doing so will create a better world for ourselves than otherwise would be the case. It doesn't really matter if you're trading with someone, or if you're producing something, or if you're just taking a couple of steps into the sun, or if you're helping someone else to feel good, or whatever it is. There's some psychic gain or psychic profit that you're hoping for. Whether or not you actually get there, I mean, it's uncertain, right? You don't know that you're going to create exactly what you think you're going to create. And that's true with any action, because otherwise you wouldn't choose to do it. If you think you're going to be worse off, why would you do anything at all, right? So on that sort of very basic level, yeah, it's definitely the case. Exactly what it is that makes you go into charity and spend time and effort and perhaps money on charity, that's probably different for different people. I mean, some people are simply in it for the gratitude. Some people are in it to just see people better off. Some people are just intrinsically motivated to just do good things, right?
That's true.
So it depends what for an economist, though. I mean, this doesn't really happen in a market. It's not a market transaction, because it is, what, as you said, one-sided. So it's really hard, since we're talking only about the psychic gains. It's really hard to know if you are making these people better off as much as is actually possible.
Yes, and I saw a very interesting Twitter thread that you had written, and I'll link to that in the description, where you made the point that some people, rather than actually wanting to help people, they want to be seen helping people, or some people, they just want to see the rich worse off. So they want to see them. I think the example you used was them working in a soup kitchen instead of developing software, whatever they happen to do.
Right. So that's an example. That's sort of personally my psychic well-being, in a sense. It pisses me off when you see CEOs and highly productive people take a day or a week off and serve soup instead. Because I'm just, as an economist, I'm sort of a little bit brain damaged to think about the trade-off, right? So I'm thinking, okay, if it were really the case that they wanted to make life better for these people who are homeless and can't get food, then wouldn't the best course of action be to provide them with as much food as possible, right? Well, then if you are a CEO and say you're making like thousands of dollars in one day, and you say, nah, not today, I'm going to take time off and I'm going to serve soup. Well, imagine if you instead had worked that day and taken that full salary and paid people to serve soup. You would get a whole lot more soup served than if you do it yourself, right? So the trade-off is if that is what they're actually trying to do, to make lives better in terms of serving soup for these people, then it's a huge loss, right? Which to me then means that something else must be motivating these people, right? So maybe they want to be involved themselves. Maybe they want to actually meet the people that they help. And maybe there's sort of a social aspect of it. Maybe it's just signaling, I mean, showing people that, hey, I'm doing this, I'm giving up all this much, right? And that might be, I mean, that's a value too, right? For them psychically. It's not a super big value for the people who are actually starving, right?
Yeah, helping them, but how much more could you be helping them if you went about it a different way? Yeah.
Exactly, and that's the economic problem, right? We're economizing on all those resources we have, try to get as much as possible out of them. And serving soup, yeah, you are serving soup, but maybe you could have for that day's pay, I don't know, hired 15 people serving soup. Well, that would be a whole lot more effective in terms of actually solving the hunger problem.
That's really interesting, because people usually just think of that as a good thing, but from an economic perspective, it could be a net loss to not only the person doing the serving, but to the people being served.
Right, it could be. And I mean, as you mentioned before in that thread, I talk a little bit about why is it that people sort of look down to it, because a CEO who would choose to just donate one day's salary instead of spending one day in the soup kitchen, you'd say that guy is not doing a whole lot, right? But if that guy would give up that day and instead serve soup, we would say he's actually trying, he's actually doing something, right? Even though if we just think about it for a couple of seconds, we would realize that no, the effect is much, much lower when he's actually doing that, right? So there's something else that in our assessment of what that guy is doing, that we prefer the lower outcome, the worse outcome, just because we want to see him or her serve soup, right? Instead of actually saving the people, which is, to me, it's confusing because it's counterproductive, right?
Yeah, I think part of it, you said, if we think about it, I think a lot of people, instead of thinking with their heads, they think with their emotions, and they want to see people being helped because that it affects their emotions more. But if they would stop to think about it, is this really the best way to help these people? So maybe not.
Yeah, and there's a time and place for emotions and feelings, of course, right? Yeah. But if this is something Mises talks about this a little bit too with respect to regulations, saying that, well, one goal is the stated goal, another is what actually comes out of something, right? And very often we choose a means and we state the goal to be something, but we sort of realize that that means it's not going to take us to that goal. It's going to take us somewhere else. So is that what we're actually aiming for? Or, I mean, it's hard to tell, of course, and it's different in for different people and in different situations too. But I mean, we this world could be so much better, right? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I mean, there are people who I think who genuinely want to help and who do go about it the right ways. Then there are people who help the wrong ways, and then there are even people who make things more difficult for other people. I think regulation by the government plays a huge role in that. And I was thinking about this too in relation to charity as an economic function, or looking at charity from an economic perspective. Government welfare, could that be viewed as central planning of charity from an economic viewpoint?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it really is a one size fits all kind of system. I mean, in many cases, the welfare state was, I mean, it were private functions expropriated by the state. So very often you had like sick pay, that types of insurance. You had groups of workers who had sort of basically an account where they all paid into every month, and if someone got ill, then that person would get money from that account, right? So they took care of themselves.
That was
in groups.
That was a mutual association, or
it could be. I think it's different in different countries exactly how they did it, but something like that, right? So they arranged with that themselves, and of course, then you have the social pressure too, that you're not just gonna take the money and I'll pretend to be sick a little while because those are your friends, right? And they will not like you a whole lot if you do that. Let's put it that way, right? And the same thing with taking care of poor in your neighborhood, feeding the hungry, things like that. Those were functions. I mean, people are overall pretty friendly and generous, and very often we're sort of relieved of these problems where we would have and usually did take care of these problems. And instead, someone else stepped in, usually the government, and said, you know what, let's make this a large-scale solution. and we'll just tax people a little bit, and then we'll just take care of it. It's a glorious promise, right? It sounds really, really good.
Yeah, we'll fix everything if you just give us a little bit of the power and the money. But
yeah, exactly. But the problem, of course, is you create weird incentives. So suddenly, I mean, it's you gain if you pretend to be sick and if you just play the system and so forth, and you don't really have those social ties with people paying directly into the system anymore, right? So if you're tricking the system, well, then nowadays people might just say, "Oh, good on you." I mean, but when it was your friends and you together collecting this money and trying to have some money if something more happens to you or to someone else, then it wouldn't be, "Oh, good on you cheating to pretending to be sick," right? So you create different incentives, but also you have the problem with what some workers in, say, one factory in some town, what they would benefit from. Well, they would probably know it, but would someone in the capital city hundreds of miles away know exactly what they would need? No, probably not. And it is pretty different living in rural America or living in Manhattan, right? If you lose your job, you're gonna need a whole lot more money to stay in Manhattan. And the situation is very different. So if you have one system, either you have to make it really, really complicated to just fit in all these situations, or you just make one rule that applies to all, which means it's not going to really fit to anyone.
Yeah, but it seems like the central solution, there's an incentive there to make things as simple as possible, because you don't have to solicit donations, you don't have to show results. The money's just going to keep coming in. In fact, it seems like if you don't do very well, then you can say, we need more money in order to do a better job. And then the taxes come in and more money keeps coming in.
Right. So that is the incentive problem on the other side. Those actually running the system or designing the system or working within the system, I mean, they're doing good things. The problem is, again, what we talked about before. Are they doing the best they can? Or are they even close to doing the best they can? Well, they can't really tell if it's one system and the money just keeps flowing in. And especially since the incentive is, well, there's a budget every year in the government, and they have to allocate funds to give all these departments budgets, and the departments they give all these different projects budgets and so forth, right? Well, if you have a surplus at the end of the year, the result is going to be that you get a smaller budget next year, right? Because you didn't need all that money.
Really?
But if you spend more than you were allotted, then obviously you had a greater need, right? So the incentive is to be as wasteful as possible, which is, of course, terrible.
Yes, yeah, since it's money that's being expropriated from people. And that too, thinking of charity specifically, the psychic benefit of having helped someone, even if it might not be the most efficient way, is gone completely, because now you're not giving your money or your time to a person. The government is taking it, and the benefit that would have accrued to the giver is now non-existent.
Right. And we have also created sort of a core of workers for the government system where they can either benefit themselves through putting the money in their favorite projects, whether they're actually effective or not, doesn't really matter, but they can get a psychic benefit from these projects that someone else is paying for. Right. So you have thousands of people working in these government departments and all of these projects and everything. And what they do, I mean, how are they actually evaluated at the end of the day? How much did they solve the problem? Well, I mean, they shouldn't make the problem go away, because that means the end of their department or project, right? Yes. So they need to keep the problem. If the problem gets worse, they actually get more money.
I know. And
right.
I was thinking about that in contrast to what I imagine would be a perfectly free market, so to speak, in charity. I think a lot of people, when they donate, they like to see results. They like to see the people that are helped. And you contrast someone who, their house burned down, for instance, and their family doesn't have a place to live. So contribute money, they build a house, and then let's say they send out thank you cards to the people who donated with a picture of their house. And wow, the psychic gain from that, incredible. But if you see a panhandler on the street, and no matter how much money he gets, he's there every day, year after year, where's the benefit of actually helping someone isn't there after a while, or so it would seem to me. So it would seem in a free market that the charity organizations that can actually show a benefit of lifting people out of poverty, over time, those are the ones who are going to get more and more donations and be able to help more and more people. And it's going to stimulate them to be more and more efficient at actually helping people, doing what they say they're going to do. So I don't know if that is all in my head, kind of taking the free market principles and applying them to that, but I think it could work.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, that's, you need that connection between doing good deeds and actually having good results, right? And that's super hard in charity because you're using money from one party to benefit another party, and you're deciding how you're doing it, but you can't really read people's minds, right? So you have to sort of guess, and sometimes it's easy because they say that they're starving, so you serve them food, right? That's easy enough. But in the village somewhere, you think that they need education, so you build a school for them. Is that actually what was at the top of their list? Is it that actually what will save them most? It's not clear.
And what are you going to teach there? Are you going to teach what American school children would want to know? Are you going to teach what they need to know, what they're already learning? I think that's why, similar to government, keeping charity as local as possible, where the needs can be known and can be addressed at a local level, and you can also see the results at a local level, is
right.
Is wonderful.
I mean, for the school, is there even a teacher? I mean, you build a school, well, fine, so you have a school building, but is there actually a teacher? Is there actually someone available to pay that teacher's salary?
Yes.
Can people actually afford to send their kids to school? Because if they're poor, they probably need to work in order not to starve. So maybe a school might not be a very good idea, even though it seems like part of the problem for the country is a lack of education. Right? So you have to be very careful with what it seems like they need from your perspective, what they say that they need, and what they might actually need, because that could be a third thing.
That's true. And again, from the economic perspective, I know one of the, let's say instead of building a school, a company went in there and built a factory and hired a bunch of people. Of course, a lot of people would get upset at that. Oh, those children, they need to be in school learning things. It's a sweatshop over there, taking advantage of them. But now, instead of working in the fields all day for 20 cents, they're working in the factory for $1. And that might seem pretty pathetic to an American, but it just multiplied their salary by 4 or 5 times.
Right. And especially if you look at the working conditions, it seems like terrible. Who would work in a factory like that? It has to be exploitation. But comparing it to toiling in the field and all the uncertainty and the low income, it might actually be a lot better, which is why we often see people line up and stand in line for a long time to get a job in these sweatshops, right? Because they pay better and they're actually better jobs. I'm not saying that they're perfect in any sense, right? And they could probably be even better, right? So I cover that in my book, The Seen, the Unseen, and the Unrealized, where I talk about sweatshops and the problem that they actually are from a sort of regulation perspective. But we should recognize that in our history in the West, we had sweatshops too. I mean, those were the factories in the cities. And it's not that anybody was actually forcing them to work there, but people left their farms to go to the dirty city to work seemingly endless days in the factory. Why? Because they were starving in their villages, right? They were a burden there. They couldn't produce enough food to keep themselves alive. So they were basically parasiting on, on everybody else. So they left for the city and made a little money, horrible lives still, right? But comparing to what the option was, it was not that bad. And they might actually make a little money to send back to their parents and siblings and what have you in the villages. So many of them chose that life for a reason. Some were tricked. I mean, there's always some bastards out there, right? So that's always a problem. But overall, it was actually part of the development of our countries.
Nice. I think that's one reason why as important a function as charity is for helping people who are distressed, economic growth is still hugely important. And part of that is just business as usual. I think part of it is trying to channel charity funds to not just solve an immediate need, but to help lift people up in ways that are personalized, that are actually going to help them improve their situation. And that at Voluntarism in Action, we're all volunteers. We all have real jobs, so to speak, and this is what we do in our off time. And I think that's a key thing, because like what we said with the government, if there's people whose salaries are dependent on people being in want, then that's an incentive to try to keep people in want and keep them needy.
Yeah, it is, and it sounds horrible. I mean, just think about it. What kinds of people would take those jobs, but it's not really about those people, right? So the reason the government is ineffective and inefficient in everything that it does is not that people aren't working hard. It's that the rewards and punishments that they get are always a little bit in the wrong direction, right? So they can work really hard. If you work really hard, but you use the wrong rules, the wrong procedures, the wrong processes, you're not going to be very effective. You just have to work really, really, really hard to get a little bit of results. And that's what we're seeing. So, I mean, it's not a problem with the people, because I think very often, well, I mean, they're attracting people that might not be the best for the job too. But I think very often it's the system. So the people are working against the system, but they can't change the system from within because it's coming from above, right?
Yeah, I think that's what people, they want to help, I think, at a basic level. And the easiest way they see is with existing systems like the state welfare, and they think, oh, that's great, that's already happening. But they don't take a step back and look at what's actually going on, to think with their minds and see what is actually happening with this money, how much is being spent, where is it going, are people actually being lifted out of poverty? And then they would see that the results might not be what they could be.
Yeah, just think about it. If all these funds and all these work hours were put into something effective, wouldn't we have solved a lot of the problems already?
Yeah, you would think so.
And you're creating this really disastrous, destructive kind of mentality too, because you probably met people like this too, where people claim, well, I already pay a lot in taxes, so why would I donate money? Why would I? Because I have problems on my own, right? I'm trying to stay afloat. I'm working my butt off. I'm not going to give more money because the government is already taking care of this. The government promises, I pay taxes. I don't have a choice, but I still pay a lot of money into these programs, so I'm not going to help, right? So it creates this problem in the other end too. So the overall effect is, it's a disaster.
Yeah, I think there's that issue of people already thinking, oh, the government's got it covered. And there's the fact that people have less money to donate because the government took it. Right. And then there's kind of the situation where now, if someone wants to start a charity, they have to compete with what's already being offered by the government, who has limitless resources because they can just keep taking more money. And so they've already set the bar, so to speak, at that place. And it's very difficult, I think, for a private charity to be able to keep up with someone who has infinite resources, not literally, you know what I mean, even if they're not particularly efficient with those resources.
Right. It's what an economist would call the crowding out effect, right? Because you can't really compete with free. And they have so much resources that, well, okay, so you're going to do the same thing. Well, you have to make people actually part with their money so that you can put that in your little project. But you might end up just doing something right across the street from where the government has a big office with hundreds of employees maybe and lots of resources. So what are you going to do? I mean, it's just such a small change on the margin, maybe. So it does it really matter? Well, you never know.
That's true. That's true. Well, I think I think to an extent it does, because we see at VIA, we see people who do get helped by us and by other people, and you can see their gratitude, see them being lifted out. And I've actually seen this. That helps to generate more donations, more people who want to help both with us and on their own. For instance, we've got a program right now with, we're distributing seeds that a company donated to us to people who want to start gardens to feed their families, to help teach their children self-sufficiency. And a word started to get out. And then we had more seed companies contacting us and say, hey, we want to donate some seeds too. And we want to help out as well. And I think that's really cool because it proves, first of all, how generous people can be, but also kind of the economic, again, with the economics, but bringing in the economic aspect of it, because an advantage for a company or a firm is advertising. And if they're seen, giving out seeds to help to this charity to help people, well, that's some good advertising right there. That's going to identify people with their brand and say, wow, I want to buy those. This is a great company. I want to get their seeds. So there's, again, on the free market side, there's more of that incentive to try to help people.
Yeah, it's where we started out, right? I mean, in the marketplace, you serve yourself best by serving others. Right, that's value creation at the very core, and then you get a cut of it, whether it's psychic or financial. It doesn't really matter that much, right? Because it depends on what you're aiming for. But there are really no contradictions like that. And I think in terms of poverty and strife and people suffering and everything, and to me the first thing would be to stop keeping them poor, because many of them are stopped from actually getting out of the situation they are in. Many need a push, they need a little help and things like that. But very often they're poor because we don't trade with them, for instance, in developing nations. So instead, we dump our foods there and destroy their own producers, right? And of course, we give aid to the political leaders who are going to use it to just cement their power rather than actually help people. I mean, had you instead said, okay, let's just trade freely with these people. Well, in any voluntary exchange, both parties expect to be better off, or they wouldn't do it. Right? There's no contradiction there.
Yeah. And I think an interesting aspect of how technology is moving forward is we're able to connect more and more with people, even on the other side of the globe. For instance, you mentioned giving to political leaders in theory to help the people, and then they keep it to themselves. One thing that we've been able to do is to partner with a village in Sierra Leone, and we send them money directly with Bitcoin. So we don't go through the government or fiat currency or through their government. It goes right to them. And the guy we work with, Mustafa, he's really, really meticulous. He sends us receipts of all of the stuff that he buys for it, supplies for the village. And so that's really cool that we can go directly to the people who need help instead of all of the intermediaries who always take it, even if they're well-intentioned, even if they want to help people, they usually get a cut for themselves along the way. And so the amount that actually gets to the people you're trying to help gets smaller and smaller, the more layers you have to go through.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they at a minimum, they have to cover their costs, right? And then, of course, you have some actors who are not totally honest, maybe, right? And then that's enough to destroy the whole supply chain there. No, I think the technology issue is I mean, we're looking at a very bright future, because now we in very poor countries, they have cell phones. That's how they do business. That's how they communicate with others. They might not even have roads, but they have a cell phone where they can do all the banking and everything, and they can keep track of their crops and their animals or what have you, right? So they use this, and they're sort of leapfrogging us because they don't have to go through producing all this physical infrastructure. That is I mean, when we get to our level, it's really a pain in the butt because it costs a lot of money to just upkeep and maintenance.
Yes.
That they don't have to go through. They can instead adopt wireless technologies and cell phones and things like that, and use that instead and build something that is probably better.
Oh, when you said the roads, they don't even have roads, came into my mind. But what about the roads? But that's another thing, without the government constantly taking that huge chunk to pay for our infrastructure, what could the free market and entrepreneurs have developed to replace that, to do it differently? Stuff that we probably couldn't even imagine right now.
Yeah, exactly. And one way of thinking about it is, okay, so here in the US, we have the interstate highway system, a government project, and they just, I guess they drew lines on the map, like north and south, east and west, and let's connect all these dots, right? Mm-hmm. Well, had that not happened, where would entrepreneurs have paved new roads? Probably not exactly where the government did, right? Mm-hmm. Probably not as many. And they would do it where they expected people to benefit from riding more than not, right? And they would probably also invest in much more high quality roads where they expected people to drive a lot, and lower quality roads where they expected people to not drive a lot, right? Because that just makes sense if it's your investment.
That's true.
Right. But now we have basically the same kinds of roads everywhere, and they're falling apart, right? And we have maintenance costs that are just skyrocketing.
It's bad. I lived in Alaska for a couple of years, and every summer they had to fix almost all of the roads because, like you said, it's the same kind of roads that they use in the rest of the United States. But Alaska is not like the rest of the United States, and every summer the roads are broken. But if you have a bottomless pot of money to draw from, what does it matter? You just keep repairing them. We're keeping people employed.
Yeah, and we're back to where we started, right? I mean, if you cannot fix the roads, if the most annoying potholes are still there, you will probably get a bigger budget next time because people are complaining, right? So why fix the most urgent problems? Maybe not. At least on the margin, it's probably better for you and the organization and your ability to fix all the potholes in the future if you don't fix the biggest one right now, which doesn't make any sense at all. But it's completely logical from their point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from economic sense, it's not there. Looking at the economy as a whole, but from the point of view of their pocketbook, yeah. And
if you look at it from the perspective of the customer, I mean, imagine if the driver was actually paying for driving on the road, and you didn't fix the potholes that destroyed people's cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can say, what am I paying taxes for? But you don't have a choice. If you say, what am I paying my road company for? You can say, I'm going to switch to a different road company.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and you're going to say, I'm not going to pay for this, next time I drive here because I have to drive here, right? And I'm not going to pay for this because you're not fixing the potholes, right? Or we're going to carpool, or we're going to, if it's bad enough, we'll build another road.
Yeah. And there's so many different options like that when people have the freedom to do what they want to do, to make their own voluntary associations with each other of any kind, as long as they're not being violent and coercive.
Amen.
Yeah. That's something you're going to cover in your book, right?
Well, we'll see. It's going to be more economic theory, but it's
okay. Yeah.
It's going to be about how to think about the economy. So, I mean, this type of discussion should be maybe not explicit in the book, but it's going to be something that people, the types of discussions that people can have after reading the book. Okay. I mean, people who are not economists, who are not libertarians or whatever, but who have they just read through the book because they want to know what the heck is this about, and then they start seeing things and they start connecting the dots. I mean, that's the point.
So the object of your book is not to explain everything, so to speak, but to get people thinking about the basics.
Exactly. So it's about helping people gain economic literacy.
Nice. Do you have a name for the book yet?
Well, I have a tentative name, and it's Austrian Economics, a Primer. Nice.
I like it. All right.
Short and sweet, right?
It's true. It's very accurate. All right. Well, thank you very much, Per, for coming on with us. Thank you for sharing some of your insights on economics, how it impacts charity, and some insights about the future, what we can do, help make the world a better place. So thanks very much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks. Same to you.
Hey, thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please like, share, subscribe, drop a comment. If you'd like, please go over and visit our website and donate to one of our causes. VIA couldn't do anything without the generous support of donors like you.